Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast.
All right, so get this. We're diving into the music scene of the 60s,
Okay.
specifically Laurel Canyon.
Right.
You know, that Los Angeles neighborhood,
Yeah.
synonymous with peace, love, rock and roll.
Right.
Joni Mitchell, the Doors, the Byrds.
That's iconic.
They defined a generation. But
Yeah.
what if I told you there's a theory that this haven of creativity, it might have been manufactured?
It is a wild theory, right? Most people think about Laurel Canyon and it's just this organic gathering of artists drawn together by this magnetic pull of creativity.
Right.
But this research you shared, mainly these interviews with a guy named David McGowan,
Okay.
suggests a different story altogether. One that kind of intertwines music and counterculture and maybe even intelligence agencies.
Okay, now that's an attention-grabbing intro.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this David McGowan. How did he even come across this theory? Was it one of those aha moments like he was deciphering hidden messages in a song lyric?
I think it was more of a slow burn of intrigue, you know? McGowan was just casually reading a book about Laurel Canyon, expecting like a nice nostalgic trip down memory lane.
Right.
But as he got deeper into it, he started to pick up on these odd recurring details,
Oh,
especially concerning the family backgrounds of a lot of these really famous musicians.
okay, hold on. Family backgrounds. Now we're not talking about like musicians whose dads played the trombone in the basement, are we?
Not quite, no. We're talking about a statistically improbable number of these musicians having direct ties to the military and intelligence communities.
Really?
Yeah.
Like every other house had a CIA agent living next door.
Pretty much, yeah, it's strange.
Wow. Okay, give me an example. How deep does this rabbit hole go?
Well, let's start with Jim Morrison,
Okay.
the enigmatic frontman of the Doors,
Yeah.
who was his father. None other than Admiral George Stephen Morrison.
No way.
Yeah, a pivotal figure during the Vietnam War. In fact, he was in command of the U.S. fleet during the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
You're kidding. While his son was like the face of counterculture, challenging authority with like every rebellious lyric.
It's quite the family dynamic.
Yeah, it raises some eyebrows, right?
Right.
And it doesn't stop there.
Okay.
Frank Zappa, another Laurel Canyon heavyweight,
Right.
known for his rebellious spirit experimental music.
Yeah.
His father, Francis Zappa, was a chemist working with, get this, chemical warfare.
Okay, at this point, it's feeling less like coincidence and more like the casting call for a spy thriller set to a rock and roll soundtrack.
Yeah.
Are there any more connections like this?
Oh, yeah. Plenty more. Stephen Stills from Crosby, Stills and Nash
Okay.
had a father who worked in Army intelligence, potentially involved in covert operations in Vietnam.
Wow.
David Crosby himself came from a military family with connections to Central America.
Oh.
And then there's Jackson Browne, born on a military base in Germany. His father potentially linked to the OSS, you know, a precursor to the CIA.
So we're talking about a significant number of musicians all drawn to this one idyllic canyon, all with these hidden family ties
Yeah.
to the very institutions they seem to be rebelling against.
Yeah.
Is it just me, or is that a lot to process? It's definitely a lot to unpack. And look, we're not saying that these connections automatically point to some grand conspiracy.
Right.
However, it does make you wonder, is this purely coincidental? Or is there something more organized at play here?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that some of these bands, they kind of appeared out of thin air, achieving instant stardom, almost as if they were well manufactured.
Manufactured bands. Okay, you have my full attention now. Tell me everything. Manufactured bands. Now, that's a concept I haven't fully wrapped my head around yet.
Right.
It sounds almost too wild to be true, like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
Right. But when you start looking at the trajectory of some of these bands,
Oh.
you know, the ones who just skyrocketed to fame seemingly overnight,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Like take the Byrds, for example.
Yeah.
Pioneers of folk rock.
Right. Mr. Tambourine Man.
Exactly.
Huge hit.
McGowan argues that some of the members had very little musical experience before forming the band.
Really? Like, how little experience are we talking about here? Were they just fans who stumbled into a recording studio?
Well, according to McGowan, their drummer, Michael Clark, had barely touched a drum set before joining the Byrds.
Wow.
And their bass player, Chris Hillman,
Okay.
primarily played the mandolin in a bluegrass band.
So not exactly the rock star resume you'd expect.
No, not really.
So how do you go from playing bluegrass to topping the charts with this genre-defining sound practically overnight?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And McGowan suggests that there might have been this deliberate push to elevate certain artists and their messages,
Okay.
individuals who maybe fit a particular mold or ideology.
Ah,
He even brings up the Monkees as like a point of comparison.
and monkeys. But they were a fabricated pop group from the get-go, right? Like they were created specifically for a television show.
Exactly. And their immense success just goes to show that raw talent and organic growth aren't always prerequisites for making it big in the music industry.
Right.
The Monkees were essentially a manufactured product,
Yeah.
designed to capitalize on the trends of the time.
Right.
And it worked brilliantly.
It did. They were hugely successful.
And it's interesting how the Monkees, this band that everyone knew was put together,
Right.
it kind of blurred the lines between, authentic counterculture and then this manufactured pop.
Yeah, it makes you think if a manufactured band like the Monkees could achieve that level of success.
Yeah.
What does that say about the potential for these unseen forces to shape popular culture?
Yeah, it really makes you think. Now, remember, this is a period of immense social and political change.
The 60s, absolutely.
You've got the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. The world's kind of on edge during the Cold War.
Right.
And all these events created this breeding ground for unrest, this questioning of authority for counterculture to really take root.
So in this climate of change and questioning, a manufactured counterculture movement could be a very powerful tool.
Absolutely.
It could be a way to steer the youth movement to kind of control the narrative.
That's one theory, right?
Yeah.
That those in positions of power, they might have seen an opportunity here to guide or maybe even co-opt this like burgeoning counterculture
Right.
to fit their own agendas.
To neutralize dissent.
Yeah.
Or to present a more palatable face of rebellion.
Exactly.
It's chilling to think about.
It is a bit chilling, isn't it?
It is.
And speaking of chilling,
Okay.
the dark side of Laurel Canyon is something we definitely can't ignore here,
Right.
because it really does stand in stark contrast to this whole peace and love image
Mm-hmm.
that we often associate with the era.
Yeah.
We're talking about a string of untimely deaths, disappearances, strange events that kind of played the scene.
Yeah. McGowan talks about these tragedies as well,
He does.
about the loss of these bright talents and the questions that still linger.
Yeah, and one of the most well-known examples is Graham Parsons,
Okay.
a pivotal figure in country rock.
Right.
His death in '73 officially attributed to a drug overdose,
Okay.
but it still remains shrouded in mystery.
Oh.
Yeah, his body was actually stolen by his road manager,
What?
who attempted to cremate him in the desert.
Hold on. Stolen bodies and desert cremations? This is straight out of a detective novel.
It's a bizarre story, isn't it? And then there's Gene Clark, one of the founding members of the Byrds,
Okay.
struggled with addiction, faded from the spotlight.
Yeah.
But his early death is surrounded by whispers of missing music, potential foul play, this lack of closure.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And of course, we can't forget the shadow cast by the Manson family,
Oh,
whose presence in Laurel Canyon and their horrific crimes, forever darkened the era.
absolutely.
Hmm.
The Manson family's association with musicians in Laurel Canyon and then the horrific Tate LaBianca murders are just this chilling reminder that even in a place that seemed to be bursting with creativity and light,
Yeah.
darkness can lurk beneath the surface.
Absolutely. It's a lot to absorb, these dark events kind of interwoven with the music and the mystery. I mean, so much of what we've talked about feels speculative, right? Like trying to piece together this puzzle, but with a lot of the pieces missing.
Yeah, it is. And it's important to note that, we're dealing with theories here,
Right.
with conjecture based on these intriguing connections and patterns.
Yeah.
But that's often where the most compelling deep dives take us
Right.
into the realm of what if.
Right. It's about asking the tough questions, considering possibilities, even if they seem outlandish at first glance.
Absolutely.
So let's say, hypothetically, that there's some truth to these theories.
Okay.
How would something like a manufactured counterculture even be orchestrated?
Right.
It seems like a monumental task.
It would undoubtedly require significant resources and influence.
For sure.
But think about the power structures that already exist within the music industry.
Right.
Record labels, radio stations, promoters, magazines.
They hold the keys.
Yeah, they hold considerable sway over which artists achieve visibility and success.
It's about controlling the airwaves,
Yeah.
the concert halls, the narratives that shape public perception.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine if those decisions were driven not just by profit, but by this desire to promote a specific message
Right.
or to amplify certain voices while silencing others.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
But how do you influence an entire generation's cultural movement?
Rap.
Seems like even with all that control over the music industry, that's a massive undertaking.
You're right. It's not simply about controlling the artists and the music.
Right?
It's about recognizing and exploiting existing social dynamics,
Okay.
leveraging them to your advantage.
Uh-huh.
Remember, the 1960s were already a time of immense social upheaval,
Right.
of questioning authority of a generation grappling with war and injustice. This counterculture movement didn't just emerge from a vacuum.
Right.
It was born from the anxieties and aspirations of a generation that was seeking change.
So it's not about creating the movement from scratch. It's about subtly steering a pre-existing one,
Right.
using its momentum to your advantage.
Precisely. It's about recognizing those currents of change and finding ways to kind of ride those waves to subtly influence the direction
Wow.
while appearing to be swept along with it.
It's like they say, if you don't pay for the product, you are the product.
Right.
Except we're not talking about a social media platform. We're talking about a cultural movement. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So if this theory holds any water, what does it say about our own times? Are we still susceptible to this kind of manipulation today?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, the potential for this kind of cultural manipulation, it's even greater today than it was back then.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Think about it. The sheer volume of information we're dealing with every day,
Right.
the influence of these social media algorithms,
Oh, yeah.
the rise of influencer culture, the 24/7 news cycle.
Right.
I mean, we're constantly being influenced often without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's like we're all living in our own little echo chambers, curated by algorithms designed to keep us engaged and sell us products and shape our opinions.
And it's not just about the algorithms.
Right.
Think about how easily trends spread online,
Yeah.
how quickly narratives can be amplified and manipulated.
Right.
I mean, it's easier than ever to manufacture consensus,
Wow.
to create this illusion of a grassroots movement.
It's almost like we're hardwired to follow the crowd, to seek belonging and validation within groups. And that makes us vulnerable to manipulation, especially when the people pulling the strings know exactly which buttons to push.
It's both fascinating and a little frightening, isn't it?
It is.
The more we kind of delve into this whole idea of manufactured counterculture,
Yeah.
the more we realize it's not just about a specific time or place,
Right.
but it's about understanding these like mechanics of power and influence,
Right.
which are timeless
Yeah.
and constantly evolving.
It's like that quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Exactly.
We may not have these shadowy figures planting musicians in Laurel Canyon today,
Right.
but those underlying mechanisms of cultural manipulation, they're still very much in play.
Absolutely. And that's why this whole deep dive has been so thought-provoking.
It has.
It's not just about uncovering the secrets of the past.
Right.
It's about equipping ourselves with the critical thinking skills that we need to navigate the complexities of the present.
Right. It's about recognizing that nothing is as simple as it seems.
Yeah.
And that even those things we hold dear, like music counterculture,
Yeah.
can be co-opted and manipulated.
Absolutely.
So what's the takeaway here?
Well,
How do we stay vigilant? How do we avoid being pawns in someone else's game?
I think it all starts with awareness.
Okay.
Just acknowledging that we are constantly being influenced whether we realize it or not.
Right.
And from there, it's about cultivating a healthy sense of skepticism.
Right.
Questioning narratives, seeking out diverse perspectives, being willing to challenge even our own assumptions.
Basically, don't just go with the flow, even if it seems like everyone else is.
Exactly.
Think for yourself. Do your own research. Don't be afraid to be a voice of dissent.
Right. And remember, questioning, it's not about cynicism.
Okay.
It's about curiosity. It's about wanting to understand the world around us on a deeper level,
Right.
to see beyond the surface
Okay.
and uncover the hidden mechanisms that shape our lives.
I love that this has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from the sun-drenched hills of Laurel Canyon to, the shadowy corridors of power. And I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been my pleasure, and for our listeners out there,
Yes.
if you're feeling as intrigued as we are, I highly recommend checking out David McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon.
Yes, it's a great book.
It's a fascinating read.
Yeah.
It'll definitely challenge your assumptions
It will.
and leave you with plenty to think about.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this the next time you find yourself swept up in a cultural wave. Take a moment to ask yourself, who's steering the ship?
Right.
You might be surprised by the answer.
You might be.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive.
Awesome.
See you next time for another deep dive into a topic that's sure to make you think.
Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Frontier Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Frontier Podcast.